We are now recording.
Okay, good day everyone. On behalf of the Second Language Writing IS of TESOL International Association, I'm happy to welcome you to the first of our conference call discussions. As mentioned, today's discussion will focus on TESOL's recently released research agenda, created by a task force co-chaired by our host today, Dudley Reynolds. We'll plan to host these every month or two and welcome ideas for future sessions. Dudley has been a primary member of the SLWIS since it was started in 2005, and most recently was elected to be the future TESOL president. In addition to co-chairing the most recent agenda task force, he served on the task force for the second agenda back in 2004. Outside of TESOL, he spends his days teaching first-year writing at Carnegie Mellon's campus in Qatar. I'd like to remind you that today's session is being recorded and that all SLWIS members will have access to the recorded version, which will be available soon after the live event. We will send you access information for the recorded version of the event. We recommend that you use headphones to avoid echo in the call. Today's discussion will last approximately 60 minutes and will be largely driven by discussion from participants. To enter a question, simply type your question into the chat box on the lower right-hand side of your screen and click on the send button.
Okay. Thank you, Todd. I'm really happy to have the chance to share the new research agenda, and more importantly than sharing it, to get some feedback and hopefully discussion around ideas about activities that TESOL can engage in related to the research agenda, and really the needs of the association and of our intersection members with respect to research. And just, for anyone who's listening to this later, I'll point out that sort of where the resources are. Of course, there is a PDF version of the research agenda. It's been sort of widely disseminated by email. And this is what you may see on your screen right now. I also want to point to the TESOL website, which has a research page. You'll see at the top, TESOL.org, advance the field /research. And the reason that I want to point this out is that in addition to the PDF version of the agenda, there's also a slightly different version here of the two sort of figures or tables that are embedded in the PDF, which present research questions. And I think a lot of people may not realize that this is out there. But if you click on this link here that says suggested questions, you get these diagrams, which are an attempt to sort of represent the information in those tables in a different way. And so we've got this sort of top-level view that shows that you can approach research from the by framing your questions around individual development, learning community, or the changes that research brings to society. If you click on any one of these sort of circles here, you then get the sort of example questions that we have linked to what we framed as change drivers. So I just wanted to sort of show you that that's there. And we had some sample questions that we distributed on the listserv. You should be able to see those now. But just before we started the recording, we were having kind of an interesting discussion starting around the idea of what are the needs of the association when it comes to research, and more importantly, of changing research from something which divides researchers and people that consider themselves primarily practitioners how do we overcome those divides? How do we make research part of the field? And I think Margie Wald is on the conversation. I want to sort of throw that question to Margie because she was sharing some interesting ideas with me about that. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Just the idea of redefining the concept of research, which is actually your second question, but also thinking about it in terms of how we disseminate information and how we provide avenues for people, practitioners, to share their reflective teaching and any action research that they may be doing in their classrooms. I was talking about, and I think it's true, we were talking a little bit before we started recording about the idea of telling stories. And I think that teachers connect really well when teachers tell stories about their experiences in the classroom, and especially if we can also hear the student voices in those stories. And so I'm thinking there may be a way to think about different formats for publishing. And when I say publishing, it could be in a journal, it could be through TESOL, it could be something even online, where teachers or practitioners are able to look at a need that they had in the classroom and step back from that, think about the changes that they made, and so kind of starting from telling the story of what they did in the classroom and why, backing up and looking more at the research rationale and maybe other rationale for, given institutional constraints, et cetera, and then looking very specifically at the student outcomes from the change that was made in the classroom, that is very much a type of research. It is very much a type of research that I think would speak well to practitioners, and I think it's important that those voices get heard. Not just by practitioners, but also by researchers.
Yeah, I really like the way you're describing that, Margie, and it's very much, if you think about this second figure, which is the one that we labeled directions for research use.
Right.
And
it follows that pattern, yes.
Yeah, that what we are suggesting is that there's sort of this, however you frame your question, whether you're thinking about the question as, with a focus on individual change, on a community or classroom that's changing society, that there's sort of this sequence where, as you said, you start with observing and just so I have ideas about my classroom. Where are those ideas coming from? And there's a tradition of good descriptive research that aligns with simply observing. And we know that these rich observations that people do are very, very useful to other teachers. But once you sort of have that observational understanding, then beginning to think about alternatives.
Right.
The questioning, the coming up with, and thinking about, okay, well, I could do it this way or I could do it that way. Which way might be better? And that's also possibly, simply comparative research. And then finally moving into a more, is this a significant enough issue that I want to do something that might be called empirical research or investigating in another way? Do I want to take it to another level? I really like, again, your idea that one way of sort of sharing this sequence is by having people tell stories about having done this there. So.
If I might, I think it is something. I think that reflective teaching cycle happens all the time in the classroom and outside the classroom and preparing, and then also the stories can be of programmatic changes as well, right? or
Right.
curricular changes. But I think that starting from the story, not cutting out the kind of literature review, the kind of what we think of as the literature review. I mean, that's still going to be in there, but not starting with that, but starting
Right.
with, I'm a teacher or I'm a program administrator, I discovered a perceived need, I had made some choices, et cetera, et cetera. That I think that by flipping it on its head like that, by flipping the whole kind of presentation of information on its head like that, it can make it more accessible, I think. It was, I will say though, difficult for some people who are used to writing in the other format to make that shift. But for some of the less experienced researchers who have a lot of classroom practice, they really thrived in kind of telling their story.
Mm-hmm.
One of the challenges, or maybe it's surprising, because is realizing that although the write-up of research describes a very linear process, and as you say, it starts with the literature review, most of us, who feel like we've done some kind of research project know that it's anything but a linear process. Right? It's a very cyclical of, you start with something in the, as you said, something gets your attention, whatever, and then you investigate it a little bit. You may go do some reading. You may go back to the classroom, try something out. But the reading is something that either comes, during the process, or sometimes even at the end, as you say, okay, I figured something out, how can I make it interesting to, people beyond my circle there. But so that, I think that's, so that's also one of the reasons that I like this diagram is that while it has a sequence, observe, question, investigate, it's presenting it in the context of sort of these concentric circles here. That it's a much more, research is a much more fluid part of practice there.
Mm-hmm. I'd also say that it can be a very messy process, something that's, I think, when you read a neat methodology description in an article where it looks kind of very linear, very structured, but in fact a lot of the times problems arise, you change things along the way, and so sometimes I think maybe we need to convey that aspect more to people to understand as well. It's constantly a learning process.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. That it's the way in which research is typically presented gives a very false impression of the process.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
I thought, like in the research agenda, you kind of mentioned the focus on practitioners, and it said we all engage in instructional activities that, if examined systematically, could contribute enormously to the field's understanding of the ways in which language is and is not acquired. And so that idea of kind of systematic investigation, I think it's often kind of set alongside, more of this kind of just telling a story about their experience in the classroom, kind of, defining that, seeing how those two can work a little more symbiotically, and how we can, how we can maintain and build expertise in that systematic form of investigation without alienating people.
But I think the telling the story part is more in thinking about how to disseminate the information. But I think, yes, I think definitely that it's not just like, hey, here's what I did. That there is something systematic in the way that those results were achieved.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think some of the messiness also, as Todd said, is time, since you're down there with, barriers, sorry, since I see you're typing under barriers.
Yes.
And I think that's also a role for the institution to to help mentor in that regard. I think there are lots of ways that people with more, I don't know that they necessarily really have more time, but are paid to do some research, could get together with teachers who may not have that as part of their merit process or part of their schedule in their days, and find mentorships, not even mentorships, but just collaborations. I see it happening some, but I think there could be a lot more of that.
It'd be interesting to, do you think there's a way in which TESOL could encourage or set up, are collaborations something that, say, an association can facilitate, or is it something which needs to be more organic and just happen?
I don't know. There might be a way to compile information of interested participants or something. I mean, the danger is always, hello, I'm the researcher, I'm coming into your classroom and I'm going to tell you, I mean, you want it to be something where it's truly a collaboration, which is why I didn't use the word mentorship there. Not that there wouldn't be some mentorship in both ways.
Right.
But, thinking, I don't know if there's a way for TESOL to do that, but that would be something to think about.
We've had some research collaboration. Chris Tardy, when she was the IS chair a few years ago, and that's how I got involved. In the IS, we did a survey on context of writing instruction, and so that kind of emerged out of an IS meeting, and a few of us came together. But again, it was, all of us were either graduate students or faculty at more research-oriented institutions, and so it kind of comes back to that question of time. I think, one thing I've gotten from when we did our survey of the IS that people wanted to be more involved and do more things, like when we send out calls for events like this, but time was a huge issue for a lot of people.
That's an interesting point, especially as we begin to really encourage ISs to think of themselves as communities of practice, that it's at the level of the IS that people are most likely to find a collaborator. You think?
Or perhaps even across ISs, because
using the intersection model.
There may be people in second language writing who do research and they want to set up something in a secondary ed classroom. Maybe we need to think about, getting some crosstalk as well.
But I do think, the ISs are really important, I think, because from, someone just going to the convention, it's so huge, so overwhelming, and the ISs kind of bring it down to a smaller scale, and so it's easy to find people of interest. And we do, we get a fairly regular use of our listserv as well, so people are sending out queries and kind of collaboratively coming up with, responses and sets of resources for that. And that's, often just kind of been organic and unstructured. And so we're trying to kind of promote more of that and to see how that goes with these discussions.
Yeah, but I like the idea of sort of encouraging the ISs to create venues for this. I mean, so for example, one of the things that might be possible, we're having an online discussion right now about the research agenda, but you might have two ISs, for example, partner on an event around a theme.
Mm-hmm.
So you might be able to have discussions like this that, for example, bring together someone who's, published on a topic with someone who's teaching the topic in the classroom on a daily basis. And have them jointly lead a discussion.
Yeah.
Or begin to think about opportunities for getting discussions started that generate questions that then lead to more systematic investigations and projects. But I'd love to see the ISs doing more of that.
Yeah, well, that might be. Oh.
Go ahead.
Oh, that might be some, I don't know, possibility for, different events at the convention, or else, I don't know, maybe more cross discussions like this online. But I've seen, the intersections, I think they're aimed at doing that, but a lot of times, we just bring people together, they all present from different perspectives, but it doesn't, I don't know if I see it facilitating the cross-IS discussions and collaborations that it could, at least in my experience.
Well, one interesting model would be to use an intersection, say at the convention, to jumpstart a discussion.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, yeah.
So that you actually, bill it as, okay, let's commission some sort of provocative seed papers around the topic. We'll discuss them, we'll present them at the convention, maybe even possibly, record them, make them available for people to access. And then we will follow up on the intersection with these organized online discussions, or whether they're synchronous or asynchronous.
Mm-hmm.
But to really, start something at the convention, but take it beyond.
Yeah. And I'm part of, we're trying these new at the Composition the Seas conference this year, called Dialogues. And so there's just a few people get together. We're supposed to talk very quickly, but really open it up for discussion from the audience. So I'll get a sense of how those go this year, and that might be something to adapt or bring to TESOL in the future.
That model. Yeah, that would be, it'd be very interesting to share it there.
Let's see.
One of the, I'm trying to think of, so what we're talking about here are models for encouraging more people to be involved with research. One question I have, so these tables both sort of present a framework for sort of looking at research and research questions. What I wonder, the questions though that are embedded in there. So if you click here, you get actual sample research questions. Do you think that those, how do questions like these function? What I'd hope they would be essentially getting people started thinking, and not something which is prescriptive. Here's what we need to do.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think people will get that about the research agenda?
I think that was pretty clearly stated, that it wasn't trying to be prescriptive in there, and more generative. And I think the questions, looking through those tables, I mean, they're very broad, and it seemed like it was a challenge for the task force to come up with something that would be useful while still being very broad and accessible. And so I feel that they're open enough where they kind of promote, people start to thinking about them. But I think we need to think of ways to engage, whether it's IS members or sessions at the convention, otherwise people in discussions about this, to actually take the time to think about some of those questions and reflect on them and bring them to action, because otherwise it can just sit around in this document and not produce a movement.
Yeah, I mean that of course is the thing. I think I've been really pleased with the support from the TESOL board and central office with this agenda to make sure that it's not something that just gets written and forgotten. It was interesting when we started the process for this agenda that there were a number of people who didn't realize that TESOL had ever had an agenda previously. When in fact, we'd had two. And getting people to do something with those agendas was very difficult. And I think it may have been because we were coming at it more from the idea that okay, this is an agenda for projects that need to be done. And I hope we've moved away from that model with this agenda, and instead saying that the agenda needs to be research itself. We need to think about its relation to our practice, whatever our practice is, whether it's directing a program, writing materials, or teaching kindergarten. It's thinking about the relationship of research to that activity, how we can do that. And you are right that these questions were challenging because we want to be inclusive, and that sort of comes back to the second question here, which is whether or not TESOL research has an identity. I'm interested in what you all think about that.
Can you go back to those questions again that you just had up before this?
Mm-hmm.
What I liked about this, I don't know how many people will get this far down into the research agenda as a teacher who isn't necessarily interested in this off the top, but this idea, I looked at just because I looked at the things that I thought might be the scariest or at least accessible, and I looked at the investigate questions. And what I liked about it, and I think this feeds into thinking about a definition, is I first looked at the second one, right, under technological support for learning. I looked at investigate, and it's like, okay, that sounds like a more kind of traditional, if you will, kind of research question, even though it still is very classroom-based. I mean, I liked that, right? But then I looked at the other two, and I saw, okay, there's quite a range here, right? If you look at that first one, it's how do I learn, comparing test responses with my reflective notes. Okay, that's not something somebody might think of off the top of their head as traditional, in a traditional definition of research, and the same with the last one, under agency of teachers. And so I think I don't exactly know how to articulate that richness, but I think there's a richness there of what research really means and what options people have, and that doing things that you might think of as just something I do every day, if you can do it a little bit more systematically, then it can fit under this definition of research.
Good. That was.
I don't know what to do with what I just said there, but I just observed that. Speaking of observing, and I kind of liked it. That there was this variety, and so I know it was. I applaud the people who came up with all these questions, because I think it really does. From this, I think if I could spend a little bit more time on it, maybe we could inductively come up with a definition that is as inclusive as those questions are.
Yeah, it's a challenge, but I think it's one actually that I hope the association will begin to talk about what is its unique identity. All right, we overlap with many other associations and fields. We bring together the field. There are many sort of disciplinary boundaries which we cross as an association, and yet I think somewhere in here there's a clear, so many of these questions that you'll read here have the word student and teacher in them.
Right.
And they have the word language in them. Or some, variation on language. And those do begin to say, okay, there is a way in which we're unique and we have a focus. And I think it's going to be important because one of the things the association also wants to do They want to think about beginning to actually sponsor research projects, have sort of small grant available. Not for a large-scale study, at least not at this point. We don't have the budgetary means to do that, but possibly funding smaller projects that someone might want to do at a school level, classroom level, or even contributing department. And as we do that, though, we're going to need to sort of begin to set boundaries and parameters for what kinds of projects we want to encourage and support there. So I think we are going to need to have a sense of identity. And I think that will make, and I'd like research and what we research to be something that people use to say what TESOL is. Yeah. I may be sort of dreaming high, but that's my hope.
Looking at the research agenda on page 5, I can kind of see the challenge the task force had in trying to start to define what that means. You said research in a field as multifaceted as TESOL necessitates epistemological flexibility and inclusiveness, and talked about all the variety of approaches and kind of how theory and practice are constantly, being integrated in one another. And I think that came out in kind of the questions, that it's constantly focused on the classroom context, that they don't become too divorced from one another. But at the end it says the diversity is a strength for the field as long as it is conceptually and methodologically sound and the results are accessible. And so kind of thinking about, again, what is conceptually and methodologically sound? What kind of studies, would you want these grants to support in that sense? How far can we go in defining that without excluding people as well?
Yeah. And I want to underscore that, because I think it is, for me anyway, it's part of what TESOL research is this notion of accessibility. And to a wide range of readers. Research by its nature is focused. It's focused on specific and specialized questions, but I think that one of the characteristics of TESOL research is that it should be useful at some level in some way.
Yeah, I was going to ask, useful to whom?
Well, I think it can be useful in that it may feed further research. It may be useful, maybe, right, it's probably a continuum. It may be useful, directly useful to practice. It may be something which feeds the design of a textbook. It may be something which simply opens up the question, or wait a minute, this has been an assumption, but we no longer can assume this. So it's really simply research that drives further research. But always with the sort of goal in mind of the ultimate, that somehow or another this needs to lead to improved language learning and positive results for society. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry, I asked that question, I was trying to think through, because I had words written down like pedagogical and programmatic, so pedagogically focused or programmatically focused research or whatever. But it seems it's broader than that, and I know it's broader than that. But I was trying to think, like, what do I see at a conference like AAAL, and I'm not saying that research is not useful. It's useful. It's just maybe useful to different populations or to a narrower population than what we're talking about here. And so that's why I asked that question.
Right, and
to get us to really think about who the end user is, if you will.
I think that's a good point, and I think I'm not sure how intentional it was when we wrote this, but I think it's probably significant that we did say accessible to a wide range. Mm-hmm. Whereas when you described research that might be, because it's definitely true that there's research that might appear or is more likely to appear at AAAL than TESOL. And there's other research that's more likely to be at TESOL than AAAL. Mm-hmm. And the same is probably true if we compare TESOL with AERA, right. 4Cs, or whatever. And I think one of the things that distinguishes TESOL from not AERA, but at least AAAL and possibly 4Cs is our size and really our diversity there. So
I think yeah, it's a challenge trying to be yet to that how it targets a practitioner audience, but also you want to have a place there for researchers as well. It's interesting kind of seeing who goes to different conferences, who goes to TESOL, who goes to AAAL, who goes to both, and how it can be a place where researchers want to go, but also practitioners want to go. And I think I see some people kind of stake out divides in that regard, and some people don't like to go to TESOL.
Right.
Vice versa.
Kind of being, I guess, accessible to everyone, but without. And sometimes it can be difficult because maybe you're accessible to no one person or something, or you're not. You don't feel that.
Trying to be something for everyone, it's hard to be. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think this is also where the notion of identity becomes important, because it then becomes, okay, when you go here it's for this reason, when you go there it's for that reason. Right? That we're not competing associations, but we offer participants different things. Mm-hmm. And one of the real values that I see in TESOL is that it actually is the best place to go if you're interested in what we were talking about earlier in terms of partnership and collaboration. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because it is, in fact, a place where someone who may be a university-based researcher, primarily doing grant-funded research, can connect with the people that funding agencies are paying them, to do research for, actually. So it's, we offer an opportunity in a good place for dialogue. We offer a good place for exchanges between people with different backgrounds and interests. And I'd like to see us capitalizing on that more. There are other venues where you go because it's very hard to find someone to discuss this, to discuss a fairly narrow question or issue, right? And so you're looking for other people who have more expertise than you do or similar expertise. And so you're really trying to find the expert conversation.
Mm-hmm. So
I think go ahead.
Well, I think the diversity and the energy there is definitely a strength. I think it's the convention where I can most directly connect with practitioners as someone who's situated more at a research university and thinks about, I think it helps me think about my own work and its accessibility and applicability to the classroom as well. And I've organized kind of panels there that, that were very kind of research heavy, that weren't very well attended, and so I'm constantly thinking about what can I do to make this work more accessible and really think about its implications in the classroom more than, yeah.
As part of our identity, I'd like to, that's a great point, Todd, and I'd like to talk about the second question that we don't have anything written under yet, but I also want to flip that a little bit based on what Todd just said. It's not just how can teachers apply results of research, but how can researchers make their research more accessible to teachers, or what are the opportunities at the conference for disseminating information about research in a way that is accessible.
I think that's an excellent.
How can we make research? How can we think about research as something that does have applicability for practitioners? Even if Todd, I'm sure that there are ways in which you felt that your research would be applicable, but for some reason there's a disconnect and it's not kind of getting through, and so we might want to think about that. But I also do think that there should be very much a role as part of our identity to answer all of these questions. It's not just about what research are we doing directly as part of the organization, but what does it mean to use research as part of practice, right? And how can teachers apply the results of research, as your questions ask? That is what separates TESOL from organizations like AAAL. Again, nothing against AAAL. It's just not their goal in quite the same way as it appears to be TESOL's goal because of the broad range of membership. And I think that one of the roles of the convention and one of the roles of publications, another thing should be to focus on these core questions here of how can teachers apply results of research and how can researchers make their research more accessible or more meaningful to practitioners.
And
I really like what you're saying there, Margie, and it's something I really, because it gives us also a sense of what we, it's okay to say if you're going to, when you come here and you talk about research, we want you to think about, all right, how can it be applied? How can it be accessible to as many people as possible? How can it be useful?
Or maybe you need to collaborate, do a session, if for example, you've done a set of research that you think has pedagogical implications, but that's not your thing, right? Then you work with somebody who can. I mean, I remember working with Doug Biber early on, and he said, like, it isn't my field, it isn't my knowledge base to think about very specific classroom practices, and so he was talking with people about, well, how do you use this in the classroom? What can you take away from this? And those are the discussions that I think we need to have. And we also, need to think about that in terms of not just at the convention, but what publication possibilities are there so that information, or talks like this or something, how can we disseminate that information beyond the conference itself?
One thing I like about...
For two reasons. One, only a certain group is going to go to the conference and have funding to go to the conference, et cetera, and so there's, issues there of access. But also, I can't go to everything. There's a huge amount of stuff at the conference, so even if you go, you're missing out on so much.
It's true, and so one of that's a different issue, which is making all of this content that is generated by the conference accessible for more than 45 minutes.
Yeah. And also thinking about things like, okay, I'll give an example here. I'm on the, as I'm sure a lot of us are, on the SLW4Cs list, the E-list, and there was a great conversation about all sorts of research and resources to use to talk about how to work with international students across the disciplines. And I wrote to the list and said, does anyone want to write a newsletter article for TESOL about this? Because not every, there are a lot of members that might benefit from this. I know it's a very hot topic. But then I think about it and I'm like, okay, as a newsletter editor, I'm supposed to have no more than 5 references. If you're really going to work on research, right, and infusing research into practice, we have to have places where I can just send something that's like, here's a compilation of various research and resources that people have created based on that research, and then just make that with members. And if I can't do it through the newsletter because of the restrictions on copy editing, et cetera, then where can that happen? And I've been trying to use the newsletter for that purpose because it's something that I'm involved in, and but I know it's creating a little bit of tension because that's not kind of what TESOL sees as the purpose of these newsletters, and that's fine. But then we need something.
I'm just typing notes here, but that's really interesting. So
there were tons of great. Everyone was putting out like books and research and and I want to share that with everybody. I just don't know where to do it.
Okay, so what it sounds like you're describing, do you know that Cal does those research digests, or at least they used to?
Exactly.
Is that the kind of publication that you're describing?
Yeah, and even more, I mean, even at times maybe less, more almost like annotated bibliographies and things like that.
Okay, yeah, by the way.
Here's something and here's how I use, and here's what, because everybody, there's so many for example, for this issue, there's so many institutional constraints that I don't want to read one thing and then, it may or may not translate, but I really want places where we can compile research that's been done so practitioners can, and program administrators and other people can access this information, and then, as a whole, what happens on the listservs is fine, we get all that, but it comes in piecemeal, and it would be nice to kind of compile all that and organize it in a way that makes it more accessible for members.
Can I interject real quick, because I have just the place for this. So the Resource Center is also a place where you can upload things, and what's great about it is that you can tag it second language writing, and then it's free not only to members but to non-members as well. So the TESOL Research Center now has a place where it used to be member only, but now it's opened up to where you can put forth obvious things like lesson plan, teaching test, assessment, what have you. But then with the new focus on research here at TESOL, we have also thought about creating a research tab in the TESOL Research Center to where people can then upload freely. And then you could share, and they all have unique URLs, so then you can share that link with the listserv saying, here's the compilation, here is the annotated bibliography, here is the longer articles, things like that.
It goes out to more people. Okay.
Yeah, and it goes out to, and you don't have to be a member to come here. Thank you, Dudley. You don't have to be a member to come here and see this stuff. The stuff with the little locks on it are members only, and those are our virtual seminars and convention sessions and things like that. But it's another avenue to get information out there. And currently, yeah, Dudley, my apologies, the search function is,
that's all right.
It's
I'm
wonky.
just checking to see what happens.
Okay, I have to say that then maybe what we need to do is I don't know how many members, and maybe you may keep tabs on this in terms of number of hits and so forth, but I feel like sometimes with the community pages especially that I just don't know how much people are accessing this information. So how do we get people to, if we're going to upload stuff there, I think people are hesitant to upload stuff places where they don't think it's going to get a lot of airtime, and so maybe that's another thing we need to think about.
If I can, yeah, and I totally agree. Yeah, I totally agree. A lot of times it's just communication and getting the resource out there to let people know it's available. But Dudley, if you can scroll down a little bit, I want to show one more great feature about this page. Click on reuse, go back up to the one that doesn't have the lock on it. Reduce, reuse,
Okay.
recycle. If you click on that,
Okay, there it is.
yeah. You'll also notice if
Okay.
you scroll down, people are able to leave comments and talk about how they've used it. There's also a rating system. You can give it stars. So you can also, like, if something is put up here, you could then have a conversation right there with the resource. And people don't have to be members to be a part of the conversation. You have to log into the website. I'm sure. You have to log into the website. So once you log in, say again?
Non-members can log into the website?
Absolutely, yeah. Our database has thousands and tens of thousands of people who are not members, but they are registered on our webpage. Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah, so Dudley,
Okay.
if you were to log in right now, you would then be able to leave a comment.
Got it.
Okay. So this is something we can look into promoting with our IS this year, perhaps to as a resource. But yeah, I want to know that it's utilized, I think,
these,
and it's user friendly.
Are these reviewed at all?
Say again?
Are these reviewed at all before they are posted?
No. Well, they're reviewed insofar as I read them, and I make sure there's no glaring grammatical mistakes. If it's something that no, it's open source. Like, it basically what happens is people hit submit, and if I give it a quick look over, and then if we do get negative feedback, then we can take it down. But for the most part, no, it's completely open source, self-vetting, or what is crowdsourcing, like crowd vetting.
That's where the ratings start. You know, one of the things that might be nice would be if, for example, some of the, I mean, this would be something if newsletters are looking for content, would be to write reviews of resources in the resource center.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so, hey, did you know this is in there, kind of thing. Or, you know, hidden gems in the TESOL Resource Center.
Right, or even something like an annotated bibliography. An article, a short article could be written with a link to the TRC where the full text is, and then you're just sending people there.
So, but because I think I think you're right. Part of the issue is accessibility and just people knowing that it's there. Obviously, one way to use the TESOL Resource Center is to go there and search for something if you've got the right keywords. But having, you know, guides to resources that are in there, reviews in newsletters, those kinds of things will help direct people's attention to that. But so that would be, yeah, it'd be interesting to possibly make better use of this.
And I also wonder if there's a way, if we're really trying to infuse this research. I know this is an issue, for example, when we're doing reviews for proposals about what does it mean to say that it's got a research foundation. I don't remember what the, what the description is. Like that one that we just looked at on the reuse, recycle.
Reduce, reuse.
Yeah. There are no references there, and that's okay, except wouldn't it be nice for there to be one or two things at the end that just, that at least show where some of these ideas came from. I don't know what is this person basing this on. I know it's crowdsourced and whatever, so it becomes difficult, but it would be really nice to have one or two things I might want to look at that provide the rationale for this. I know when I'm publishing something in the newsletter or in the TESOL journal, we always ask for that, and I know this is a slightly different source, but there probably are there are a couple of things that support what this is talking about. So even if there were just a section in there that just said rationale, right, that would be nice too. I don't know. I don't know if that's too much in the face of the user who just...
Here's what I would say on that. We don't want, what we want to do, we don't want to discourage anyone from contributing,
Right.
sharing an idea. But at the same time, you know, maybe it's, I don't want to do levels, but I like the idea of tabs.
Mm-hmm.
So there might be a tab where for resources that have been vetted or that meet certain requirements in terms of connections. But, you know, it might be, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't want to turn it into a these are better than these kind of,
Right.
these submissions are better than these submissions. I don't want to get hierarchical there. I'm just thinking that there probably is some rationale for this. This isn't my area, so I mean, if this were something I do more, I'd be able to like list off one or two things. Maybe that's something that ISs could do, is to go through some of these, and in the comments, you know, there is a list, you know, the listening speaking folks or the call people or the, you know, digital media folks, they could go through and you know, in the comments section just list a couple of things.
Yeah, to add an annotation.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how important that is. I just.
It's a very good. It's a good suggestion, a good idea. I just got a heads up that we're at about an hour, and I think that it's been a productive discussion, touching on both sort of opportunities and challenges that we have to overcome, and getting at the idea of what research should mean within the TESOL Association. And so thank you, everybody, for some rich ideas, and I really enjoyed this. And thank you especially to Sarah for participating on a snow day when she didn't have to, and we really appreciate that.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Thank you, and thank you, Dudley, for being here today, too.
Thank you.
Okay.